Let freedom ring. The United States celebrates Independence Day. The Founding Fathers and faith. We dig into U.S. Catholic history. Belief in action. Looking at the rise of religious liberty threats in our nation. And a U.S. veteran remembers Pearl Harbor nearly 75 years ago. Those stories and more on our One Nation Under God EWTN News Nightly special for Monday, July 4th, 2016. Good evening. Happy Independence Day. Thanks for joining us for our One Nation Under God special. I'm Brian Patrick. Today, the 4th of July, we celebrate America's independence. On July 4th, 1776, the Continental Congress signed the Declaration of Independence. The 13 colonies were no longer a part of the British Empire, but considered the United States of America. Festivities across America today include fireworks, parades, and family barbecues. An island in southern Maryland holds an intriguing chapter of history of freedom and faith. Mark Irons has more.
From this distance, it might not look like much, the little island behind me. But hundreds of years ago, the Catholic faith made a big landing there. Let's hop on a boat and take a closer look. Visitors to this island in southern Maryland can make the trip without much trouble. But in 1634, two ships from England made a dangerous voyage in search of religious liberty. Those passengers found it on these shores, naming the place St. Clements Island.
This is the birthplace of religious liberty in America.
It's the site of the very first Mass in the English-speaking colonies, and it was celebrated that same day those early colonists reached St. Clements Island. Leading the congregation that first Mass was Jesuit Father Andrew White.
In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit.
Fast forward 380 years to this week, a new congregation, some here descendants of those first colonists.
Masses out here are just really special.
In place of Father Andrew White, Cardinal Donald Worrell, and a Mass to commemorate 75 years of the Archdiocese of Washington while remembering the significance of this holy ground.
We come here simply to recognize the roots of our freedom, the roots of our heritage that we all take for granted today as Americans. And it was that first group of Catholic pilgrims who arrived that said, we're a free people, and that means freedom of religion.
That freedom brings a sense of pride to those who visit this island.
To stand on such holy ground here and know that we are so grateful to be Americans.
The people who came over from England, a long time ago, were starting something pretty wonderful. We're happy to kind of carry on their legacy.
God bless America.
Isn't it great to be on this little island?
A little island with a big history. Visitors may come and go, but the spirit of freedom and faith is here to stay. Mark Irons, EWTN News Nightly.
Mark, what a blessing to revisit that great story. Hey, did you know the first book printed in the U.S. was a prayer book? Jason Calvey turns this intriguing page of American history for us tonight.
A new exhibit at the Library of Congress features an original Declaration of Independence and other colonial works. But they're not the headliners. These twins are. Two copies of the first English book printed in the New World in 1640. The Book of Psalms were translated into English for singing during the liturgy. It's known as the Bay Psalm Book.
They're in the wilderness of Massachusetts. And the fact that their religion and their need to preserve that religion is so strong that they actually print this book, I think is a phenomenal opening moment for American printing.
The exhibit tells the story of that early history. Here's the first complete Bible printed in the Western Hemisphere, the Eliot Indian Bible of the 1660s.
It's a very important contribution on the part of Eliot to transcribe the Bible into what was only a spoken language. So he's put Algonquin on the page.
The exhibit walks you through the history of printing in the colonies leading up to the Declaration of Independence. This one behind me is one of 26 of the originals still around.
The electricity of the announcement spreads through the colonies. And it's because you've all gotten on horseback with your copy. You stop in every town. It's read from the steps of the courthouse. Somebody writes it down. You get back on your horse and you go.
It's a story of American Revolution in printing. And the first chapter begins with a book of Psalms. In Washington, Jason Calvi, EWTN News Nightly.
Thank you, Jason. As we celebrate our nation, there is a call to return to the motto on our seal, E pluribus unum, Latin for out of many, one. After the recent Orlando massacre, the Heritage Foundation's Mike Gonzalez wants conservatives to spark a national debate. We recently sat down with him. What's the debate we should be having after what happened in Florida?
We should come together as a nation, which we haven't done. After 9/11, after Pearl Harbor, we came together. Every tragedy has brought us together, and we haven't. And one thing is we must ask, how come an American born in Queens and raised in Fort Lucie or Fort Pierce, executes 29 of his compatriots? How does he pledge allegiance to ISIS? And here's the thing with ISIS and the recruiters and Al-Qaeda, we have to fight them with bullets, but we also have to fight them with an idea. We have to find an idea with a better idea. And that idea is a national identity, teaching them about a constitution, our founding documents. And in that, have we done that? I would say we haven't. We haven't done it now for 30 years.
Don't our public schools teach American history, patriotism?
They don't teach patriotism. They teach history very badly. Howard Zinn is still the #1 best-selling book, People's History of the United States. And what that teaches is that the founding was a farce, was just old men trying to keep privilege onto themselves. It's a pack of lies, and this is what's being taught to our children. The concept of assimilation, which the founders put in right at the beginning, teaches that everybody can become an American. Lincoln talked about that. That immigrants could be like the descendants of the founders. Like Paul said about what Christ did, that even Greeks and Gentiles could be the descendants of Abraham too. It is very similar. It's actually very inclusive. Assimilation is a very inclusive concept.
So you're saying that what happened in Florida didn't unite us. What do you suggest?
Well, I think that we need to have a national conversation about multiculturalism, about what this political model has done to the country. The founders very much understood that this was a country of immigrants that needed to have one national identity, one nation, in order to keep together the constitutional republic they had created. Constitutional republics require a lot of work, and the know-how of the upkeep of constitutional republic doesn't come in the bloodstream, has to be learned, has to be taught.
It sounds like it has to be relearned. Mike Gonzalez with the Heritage Foundation, thanks for your insight, Mike.
Thank you.
And as Mike referred to and Pope Francis pointed out during last year's visit to the United States, America is a country largely built by immigrant families. With some help from the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum and the genealogy website Ancestry.com, our Catherine Zeltner recently discovered more about her family's journey to America.
A new milestone for the World Memory Project. It now features the names of 1 million Nazi victims.
Everyone thinks about the 6 million Jews who were murdered in the Holocaust, but there are about another 6 million victims who are also perished.
Victims included the mentally ill, political opponents, and Catholics.
Through these records, they can see the actual experiences, what happened to them.
Records containing details about Holocaust and Nazi persecution victims are available for free.
Yes, that's my father. That is my father. Where did you get it?
The Holocaust Memorial Museum welcomes anyone to simply walk in to their resource center to fill in the missing gaps to their family's history during Nazi persecution. Stephen Vito has been a top researcher there for 25 years.
It's really this wide open yearning. All they know is that they had family and they don't have them anymore.
It's a yearning that's personal.
It was your grandfather?
It was my grandfather.
My Opa, or grandfather, was born in Hungary in 1927. As a teenager, he was taken to a Russian labor camp before eventually coming to the United States.
Here he is. This record is of him right after the war in the displaced persons camp system. And there he is again, last name, first name, his nationality, he's Roman Catholic.
I learned my Opa came to the U.S. alone at age 24. He was offered aid. I even get a peek at his young signature.
I knew nothing about you 15 minutes ago, and now I know almost your whole family story.
Catherine Zeltner, EWTN News Nightly.
Coming up, a Catholic author outlines the latest attacks on religious liberty. And an Air Force veteran says he was assaulted over the use of the word God. Thank you for joining us for our One Nation Under God special on this 4th of July, 2016. I'm Brian Patrick. Recently passed laws, court decisions, and the cultural climate pose new threats to religious freedom. That topic is explored in a brand new book. Political director Lauren Ashburn talks with author Mary Eberstadt.
Mary, thank you so much for joining us. Your book, It's Dangerous to Believe, you said, is talking about the religious witch hunt that is going on in our society. Why do you use that term?
It's a strong term, Lauren, but I do think it suits for several reasons. There is a level of irrationality and discrimination directed against religious believers these days that is really something new in the Western world.
Give me an example of that.
Well, there are numbers of examples in the book of people, for example, who have lost their jobs or been suspended for things like saying a prayer on a football field at the end of a game. There's widespread discrimination and recrimination on social media against religious believers just for being religious believers. People are called bigots and haters and other hurtful names just in virtue of being followers of the cross. And that is something new under the sun.
Are Catholics particularly targeted?
I think it is pretty safe to attack Catholics, so in a sense, yes. For example, Hilary Mantel, who's a well-known novelist, winner of the Booker Prize, England's most prestigious literary prize, said some years ago, quote, "The Catholic Church is not a place for respectable people," unquote. There's a lot of that kind of free-floating aggression against religious believers. And what I'm trying to do with this book is bring attention to it and ask secularists and progressives especially to be open-minded and to extend to religious believers the same kind of courtesy that they want extended to themselves.
How will this play out in the presidential election?
Well, it's interesting because civility has become a huge issue in the campaign for reasons that we don't need to go into, but that everyone will be familiar with. All of a sudden, the idea of ad hominem attacks on people is something that a lot of folks want to distance themselves from. They think that's not fair play. Well, my point is that for the past 10 years especially, there have been a lot of ad hominem attacks on religious people just for being religious people. So before the progressive side of the spectrum starts policing what's happening on the other side, they might want to look to their own and see what's happening there.
Mary Eberstadt, It's Dangerous to Believe is your book. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Lauren.
And thanks to Lauren and Mary. And one recent attack on religious freedom in America involves an Air Force veteran.
Our flag is known as the Stars and Stripes. A union consists of white stars on a blue field.
Decorated Air Force veteran Oscar Rodriguez Jr. says he was dragged out of a retirement ceremony because his speech mentioned God. We recently discussed his case with a religious liberty lawyer. Ken Klukowski, senior counsel for First Liberty, the law firm representing Sergeant Rodriguez, is here tonight. So why was he so forcibly removed from this private retirement ceremony?
Well, Brian, the lieutenant commander who commands the squadron from which this other man was retiring, a man who had heard Mr. Rodriguez give his speech before, asked, "Can you please give those remarks at my retirement speech?" When this commanding officer found out, he made it clear that he did not want those remarks said. They were even putting up warning signs saying, "Warning, God will be mentioned during this speech." But nonetheless, it is a retiree's prerogative as to what they want in their retirement ceremony. Mr. Rodriguez is retired after 33 years of honorable service. He's a decorated veteran. He was there as a private citizen, along with many other private citizens. At the appointed time, he took his position. He started to give his speech, and 4 uniformed airmen seized him and forcibly dragged him out as he was given his speech.
So the Constitution protects our rights to freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of conscience. How can the U.S. Air Force do this?
Well, and the Fourth Amendment protects against unreasonable searches and seizures. When a government agent grabs you, they better have an arrest warrant or some sort of special circumstances. There's also a Fifth Amendment issue here. The bottom line is, under the U.S. Constitution, they can't. There's also federal statutes like the Religious Freedom Restoration Act and other federal laws that are implicated by this. This is just flatly illegal any way you look at it, and thank God we have this video, so there's no question as to what the facts were on the day in question.
What is the reaction from the Air Force? Has there been any?
Their reaction is forthcoming at this point. In fact, we've seen two separate one-sentence statements that contradict each other. One saying that he was given an unapproved speech and therefore that could not happen. But also a separate spokesman from a different unit said that these are that private speech is allowed at these events, including religious references. So on Monday, First Liberty sent a demand letter to the U.S. Air Force reciting the facts, listing the provisions of the U.S. Constitution and federal law that had been violated. We are giving them until Monday to issue a formal written apology, to acknowledge their unlawful behavior, to give a written promise that Mr. Rodriguez can return at any time on the base to engage in constitutionally protected speech, and to hold accountable and appropriately punish those responsible for this. If they don't meet all of those requirements by Monday, then we'll have to take the next step.
Putting it on them.
The facts are at firstliberty.org. If your viewers want to check it out and see the video, you really can't make this stuff up, Brian.
I saw the video. Firstliberty.org. Ken Klukowski, thanks for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
And an update. The day after this discussion first aired a couple of weeks ago, the Pentagon called for an investigation into the Air Force's actions against Rodriguez. Up next, City of Mercy. Young adults prepare for World Youth Day in Krakow. And a one-on-one with General George Washington.
So how old are you?
One Nation Under God, a special EWTN News Nightly for this 4th of July. Good evening. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Brian Patrick. Later this month, young Catholics from around the world gather in Krakow, Poland for World Youth Day. Excitement continues to build, as Catherine Zeltner reports.
The road to heaven is heaven.
Sarah Perla still remembers the joy she felt at World Youth Day Rome back in 2000.
It just gave me a sense of like heaven is like we're joyful, we're like still considerate of other people.
Officials gave an update on World Youth Day in Krakow, Poland yesterday at the John Paul II Shrine in Washington, a memorial dedicated to the founder of the global celebration. About 2.5 million people are expected in Krakow. Blessed Pier Giorgio Frassati and St. Kateri Tekakwitha are among the patron saints for the pilgrims. The John Paul II National Shrine has an entire room dedicated to World Youth Day. You can learn more about past events with their World Youth Day memory table.
Look at this image. Where are all these young people now?
Bishop Frank Caggiano has been to 3 World Youth Days before, but he calls Krakow Mercy Central. It will fall during the Jubilee Year of Mercy, and Poland is home to the Shrine of Divine Mercy.
None of us are perfect. We have all failed the Lord at one time or another. And when young people realize that solidarity means solidarity in grace and just on a human level, that even our failures can give glory to God. What an awesome idea.
Less than 1% of U.S. young adults are expected in Krakow, but Caggiano says those young people can spark a change in the world.
We'll look at it this way. The Lord started with 12, lost 1, and converted a world. Can you imagine what we could do?
Catherine Zeltner, EWTN News Nightly.
Thank you, Catherine. That report from just about a year ago. And this World Youth Day marks 30 years since St. John Paul II established the tradition. The Polish Pope's biographer delves into why this year's World Youth Day is so significant. St. John Paul II's biographer, George Weigel, is now the author of City of Saints, a pilgrimage to John Paul II's Krakow. Between St. John Paul II's following and the popularity of Pope Francis, what are you looking for in this World Youth Day, George?
Brian, this is World Youth Day coming home. World Youth Day, in a sense, began with Karol Wojtyła's, Father Karol Wojtyła's ministry to young university students in the late 1940s and early 1950s. That's where his instinct for youth ministry, as we now call it, was formed. That's where the idea that young people wanted to be challenged to lead lives of spiritual and moral grandeur got formed in him. So World Youth Day is coming home. I think it's going to be a great celebration of John Paul the Great. It'll be a celebration of St. Faustina and the Pope who has picked up those themes of the Divine Mercy will be there to lead that celebration.
In Poland, he is just admired and revered. Is his papacy, is his leadership still fresh in the Polish people? Will we see that?
I think it's more emotional than intellectual, frankly. I don't think that the rich social magisterium of John Paul II, for example, has really worked its way into the texture of Polish life, Polish Catholic life. I hope World Youth Day accelerates that a bit. I love Poland. I've spent almost 3 years of my life there when you add it all up. But Poles need to stop looking in the rearview mirror at John Paul II and start looking forward through the eyes of John Paul II.
You spent 12 years with JP2 as you researched and wrote Witness to Hope. How did that affect your own faith journey? Is there anything that just stays with you from that time?
He was a remarkable human being. To experience the depth of his faith could not help but strengthen one's own faith. It's important for people to recognize that while this was a man of extraordinary human gifts, intellectual gifts of personality, he was a great sportsman at one point in his life, it all came out of his prayer. That was the reactor core that everything else emerged from. That's what allowed him to get through the Nazi occupation of Poland during the Second World War. That's what allowed him to be the pivotal figure in the collapse of European communism. That's what allowed him to reinvigorate the Catholic Church. It all was inside out.
You capture that also well in your books. George Weigel, thanks for being with us.
Thanks, Brian.
And as we celebrate the United States today, we honor the heroic patriotism of our war veterans. Jason Calvi visits with a veteran who lived to tell the tale of the Pearl Harbor attack.
It was a sad situation, all right?
93-year-old Dale Red Robinson was near Pearl Harbor on December 7th, 1941.
A date which will live in infamy.
One plane came over so low, right over the quadrangle. You could see the pilot. Looked like he was grinning. Yeah, I can still see him. And I'm still cussing him.
The sneak attack propelled the United States into World War II. Ted Waller enlisted the next day.
It gave me a chance to join the Navy and go fight the war, be a hero.
Right there? Yeah, right there.
This week, these World War II vets are visiting the nation's capital, the greatest generation.
Thank you for your service.
And while Red loves to laugh, he has a solemn mission. Saluting the 2,400 Americans killed 74 years ago and remembering his fellow soldiers, all now gone.
Well, I thought of all my buddies. Brought back a lot of memories and their families.
Red shares war stories with other World War II vets, like 90-year-old Laura Mays.
I believe that our good Lord has caused us to get through a lot of this.
Honor Flight Dallas brought them to D.C. to visit the war memorials.
And there is your memorial.
Red returns to Texas knowing his service has not been forgotten.
Well, thank you for your service.
At the National World War II Memorial, Jason Calvi, EWTN News Nightly.
Thank you, Jason. Our greatest generation. May God bless them. Well, in declaring independence from Britain, that led to the Revolutionary War. U.S. troops, of course, led by General George Washington. Wyatt Goolsby gives us a sense of what it would be like to have a conversation with our first Commander-in-Chief.
In honor of his 283rd birthday, members of the U.S. military place a wreath inside George Washington's tomb in Virginia, a sign of respect for a man who set the standard for the American president. At his Mount Vernon home, visitors were treated to patriotic music and military performances. Today, President's Day, is Mount Vernon's single busiest day of the year. The estate hosts thousands who tour the grounds and participate in programs all aimed at taking visitors back to the late 18th century.
It's very important for us to create that sense of authenticity, that sense of place, to really give people a sense of what it was like in early America, the world that Washington lived in.
That means close attention to detail, whether it's the buildings and shops or the actors in period costumes.
The characters walking around the ground tell stories that would have been current to his time. If you try to bring them into our world, they try to push you back and remind you that they are living in 1799, and what you know today may be very different from what they know.
No better example of that than General Washington himself, who refused to break character even when I asked him about his birthday.
How old are you going to be now?
Well, I'm well into my 60s, sir. How old are you?
Well, luckily I'm just 30, so I'm not quite there yet.
I have boots older than you.
The general even opened up about his childhood.
We've been hearing this rumor that you chopped down a cherry tree.
It never happened. It's a myth. There is a fellow who wrote a story about me, and he doesn't know a lick about my childhood. And so he made up this story. But he was trying to teach a story, and I do believe that honesty is the best policy.
And for all the people who celebrate George Washington, it's good to know the first president was always honest and respectful to visitors at his home, virtues that Americans still hold dear to this day.
I guess we bow since we're in Virginia.
We bow, sir.
In Virginia, Wyatt Goolsby, EWTN News Nightly.
Of course, that was the middle of winter, sharply different from this 4th of July. Until tomorrow, for our EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Brian Patrick. Have a good and safe 4th of July. Good night and God bless you.